Today, we are going to get into the work of a writer who managed to solve one of literature's biggest puzzles. How do you write the story of your life? By taking yourself almost completely out of it.
I mean, really think about that. Can you write a memoir without using the word I? It sounds impossible, right? The whole point of a memoir is the self, the first person. But what if you could? What would even be left? Well, this is the exact question that drives the incredible work of Annie Ernaux.
And the answer, of course, comes from the woman herself, Annie Ernaux, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature back in 2022. And here's the thing, she didn't just write a new kind of book, she went ahead and invented a whole new genre for it, a term she calls autosociobiography. Okay, so what in the world is autosociobiography? Let's break it down. Ernaux's whole idea was to look at her own life not as something unique and special, but as a kind of sociological experiment, a place where all the big social and historical forces of her time just happened to meet. Herself isn't the subject, it's more like the lens we get to look through to see the world. This right here is her project in a nutshell. It's this amazing blend of memoir, sociology, and history. You see it in her books like A Woman's Story or The Happening. She takes these deeply personal, intimate experiences, the shame she felt about her working-class roots, a secret abortion, her relationships, and she completely reframes them. They're not just her story. They're clues that tell us something much bigger about the shared political and cultural world of her entire generation. And this is where you can really see how radical her approach is. A typical memoir, right? It's all about that confessional intimacy, pulling you deep inside the author's head. Well, Ernaux just flips that on its head. She's aiming for a kind of objective, almost scientific observation, using her own life as a case study to understand an entire society. It's this intentional shift away from the personal and toward the impersonal. And this quote, wow, it just perfectly captures the sheer scale of her ambition. She's not digging into her own past just for the sake of it. No, she's digging into her past to find the world as it existed inside of her. Her project isn't just about her life. It's this incredible attempt to map the passage of time itself, to capture what she calls the lived dimension of history. This brings us to the next big piece of the puzzle. The most stunning example of this whole autosociobiographical idea is in her masterpiece, The Years. This is where she absolutely perfects the technique of the collective narrative voice. Just think about how audacious this is. We're talking about a 200-page memoir, her defining work spanning 65 years of her own life. And the word I is nowhere to be found. Not once. So how on earth does she pull that off? Well, she does it with this constantly shifting set of pronouns, and each one has a very specific job. She only pops up when Ernaux is describing herself in old photographs, looking at her past self like a historian studying an artifact. Then there's we, which tells the story of her generation's shared experiences, the songs they all knew, the political moments they all lived through. And then there's one, on in French, and this one is just brilliant. It's this ambiguous pronoun that completely blurs the line between the author's voice and, well, everyone. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some clever literary trick. Ernaux noticed that this collective voice, this we, was exactly how her parents' generation talked about their own experiences, especially the trauma of World War II. Their individual lives had been so overwhelmed by these huge collective events that the I almost ceased to exist. So she consciously borrows that inherited voice to tell the story of her own time. Okay, so if she's getting rid of a personal narrator, the I, who is telling the story, how does she actually structure this huge, sprawling narrative that covers decades? Well, that leads us to her next brilliant move, using photographs to anchor collective memory. So the book moves forward in time, and each new chapter, each new era, is often kicked off by a super detailed, almost clinical description of a photograph from her life. But, and this is the genius of it, we never actually see the photos. They're not in the book. And by leaving them out, she's making a powerful statement. She's saying this project is about memory, it's about language, and how unreliable they both can be. It's not about some objective visual proof. The image only exists in her words, which forces us, the readers, to actually participate in the act of remembering. Take an example like this one. For those of you who study rhetoric, this is a classic use of ekphrasis, describing a work of visual art in words. For Ernaux, each of these described photos becomes what she calls a static shot, a single frozen moment that acts like a portal, a doorway into the huge narrative of collective events that were swirling all around that one simple image.
So let's put all the pieces together. We have these shifting pronouns, the absent photographs. What happens when all these techniques start working together? What does it all achieve?
Well, her method does something pretty profound. It totally dissolves her own individual ego into this much larger generational voice. Her life story becomes historical evidence. And in a way, time itself becomes the main character of the book. And what we get is something critics have called the very first collective autobiography.
And this is where her work becomes so powerful for us as readers. Like this review says, by getting rid of the I, she creates an open space for us. Her specific memories, a song on the radio, a commercial jingle, a political slogan, they're designed to act as triggers for our own memories. Her story ends up becoming a kind of vessel for the collective memory of an entire generation.
So let's wrap this up. Why does all of this matter? Why is this literary project so important, especially for how we think about literature, memory, and what it even means to be a self? Ultimately, what Ernaux gives us is a whole new way to think about ourselves. In her world, we're not these isolated islands with our own unique little psychological journeys. No, we are crossroads. We're points of intersection where the language, the products, the politics of our specific time and place all meet to make us who we are. And that is a deeply political statement, especially for a woman from a working class background, to stand up and insist that her life isn't just personal, it's historical. And in the end, her entire life's work really comes down to this one beautiful, almost haunting goal. It's like a literary rescue mission. It's this desperate, gorgeous attempt to use writing to preserve the very feeling of lived time. All the sensations, the beliefs, the fleeting moments before they vanish into the past forever. So, I'll leave you with this question. Annie Ernaux turned her own memory into a sociological and historical map of her generation. If you were to do the same for your own life, what would the key landmarks on that map be? What are the songs, the images, the events that have defined what she calls the time where you will never be again?